you who checked out that slide. I am a clinical and sports psychologist. I did my graduate degree in Baltimore, Maryland at Loyola University, Maryland, and spent a lot of my clinical experience either working in eating disorders or working in sport and trying to kind of like pull from both of those. And after I finished my pre-doctoral internship, I was trying to see where I wanted to go and what I wanted to do. And this place called McCallum Place in St. Louis, Missouri was looking for someone who could work with athletes who are struggling with an eating disorder. And that was never really my plan to move to the Midwest. All my family is in Florida. But it was really just the perfect opportunity and exactly what I had been trying to do my whole life. So I'm super passionate about this. It got me to move across the country. So I'm really excited to be here with you all and share some of the information that I think is really essential for athletes in general, and especially in our youth athletes. So without further ado, I will share my screen. Alrighty. So a brief overview for y'all is we're going to go over what eating disorders are, the risk factors kind of more generally and specific to athletes, consequences of eating disorders, awareness and identification, how to see that, prevention, huge for our youth sports. And then we're going to go through a case example that's kind of geared more towards coaches, but I think it can also be applied for parents, teachers, any other kind of support person in athletes' lives. So here are kind of the big three eating disorders I feel like most people hear of or know about: anorexia, bulimia, and binge eating disorder. So anorexia is typically defined as the energy restriction leading to significantly low weight. And in the DSM, the way that this is determined is through BMI. I think overall, and our sport dietitian at McCallum would probably be able to give much more detailed information on this, but BMI is really not a great indicator of someone's weight or their ideal weight, or kind of like where their body naturally should be to function the best. So there's already a little kind of like systemic issue there. But to not get on my soapbox for too long, there's also an intense fear of gaining weight and a disturbance in body weight or shape. For bulimia, there may or may not be low weight indicated, but it's with recurrent episodes of binge eating and some kind of compensatory behavior. So someone's consuming a large amount of food in a short amount of time, and they have this sense of feeling like they're out of control. And then they kind of purge through either vomiting, excessive exercise. We also see people take laxatives or diet pills, anything that kind of like they think is getting whatever they put into their body out. And it's usually kind of this guilt shame cycle that keeps someone locked in, unfortunately, for a pretty long time. It's pretty challenging. Binge eating disorder, similar to bulimia, where someone is eating a lot of food in a short period of time, secretively, again, feeling out of control, but there just aren't any compensatory behaviors or purging. So that's kind of a brief overview of some of the DSM diagnoses. Some others I just wanted to note is eating disorder not otherwise specified. This is a huge one we see in our population because all of the criteria for anorexia are met except the significant weight loss. So the weight is currently within a normal range. And that can also be for bulimia too. Like not all of the criteria are met from DSM, but I think what I really wanted to drive home with this one is we see folks who are kind of like systemically in our culture, someone's like, oh, you don't look like you have an eating disorder, or you don't look like you have anorexia. And again, it's kind of that like interesting thing where the low weight determined by BMI doesn't really look the way society kind of has taught us maybe, or if you like think back to your health class in high school, like what anorexia looks like. Someone who kind of appears to be a healthy weight and is suffering with anorexia, maybe their ideal body weight, the weight that they're supposed to function, is 15, 20, or even 30 pounds or whatever above where they are. But someone could look at them and be like, oh, you're 5'6" and whatever pounds, like you look perfectly healthy, but maybe they're still suffering from anorexia. So I think, knowing that you don't have to look a certain way or meet all of the criteria of those DSM diagnoses to be struggling with an eating disorder. Another one that I really wanted to highlight is orthorexia, especially with our athlete population. So orthorexia is this preoccupation with being healthy. And you'll see the quotes around healthy is because it's so preoccupied that you are kind of losing health and actually getting to a place that's not very healthy and actually pretty harmful. So I threw this image in there because, someone's seeing a piece of food and they're kind of really diving in of like, can I eat this? Is it healthy? How many grams of this? How many grams of that? Yes or no? And so much of that starts to fill up the brain space that you're not really able to attend to other things that are important in life. And same thing with exercise, like, oh, running's really healthy for me. So I'm going to run X amount. Okay, now I'm going to run X amount plus and plus and plus. So we actually might get into this place of energy deficiency. Sometimes on accident, it really can just be like a slippery slope, like someone's trying to be healthy and then they just kind of take it too far. And then you can see some other ones that are listed there. And there's more kind of official and unofficial eating disorder or disordered eating that, through the resources I'll list later, you can certainly read up more on. So as I just kind of mentioned, there's eating disorders and disordered eating. And I like to show this picture because it is a spectrum. So you'll see on the left-hand side, the blue-ish is someone who, has a healthy relationship with food, a healthy relationship with exercise and their body. And then as they kind of flow through that, maybe they're having some disordered behaviors, but they're not meeting full criteria for an eating disorder. And then on the far right in like the reddish orange is things that might be really detrimental to your health and might qualify you for an eating disorder. But most of us fall along this spectrum somewhere because we live in a diet culture and we've been taught messages around food and body image and what's accepted and what's not and what's, healthy and what's not. So it's very common for someone to be on this spectrum and not necessarily be diagnosable, but could certainly use some support in bettering their relationship with food or movement.
Savannah, someone just typed in to ask if you could just explain a little bit more about what diet culture is.
Yeah, absolutely. So we live in a society where there's a certain ideal for both, men and women, all genders, certain race and ethnicities. I think in our Western culture, we see typically like white cisgender female or white cisgender males kind of presenting what the right body is to have. And there's also some historical kind of like gender dynamics that are present in like what someone should look like from like the female lens. Women back in the day were expected to be kind of this thin figure that provides for the household and it really looks a certain part for that male counterpart. That is, back in the history, like what women typically were expected to be and to look like. So that trickles into present day. But certainly there are body ideals for several people and there's athletic ideals as well. So what someone thinks that they should look like in order to perform well, in order to be perceived as someone who performs well. So all of those contribute to diet culture is like almost everyone knows, like if they were to say, what do you think is the ideal body in America or in the world? Someone would probably say like thin, but maybe it's muscular or curvy in the right areas. And this also comes from, if we pick up any magazine or read or watch any television with commercials, I know we have Netflix these days, but you'll probably see an ad for some kind of weight loss promise, some kind of diet saying, hey, get rid of that unwanted weight, finally feel happy, finally feel in control of your life, just kind of promising all these kind of emotional and cognitive things that are going to happen if you choose to lose weight and that you kind of should lose weight and you're going to feel all these amazing things if you do. And traditionally diets don't work because when we go into a calorie deficit, our body is kind of like, hey, what's going on? We can only restrict for so long that usually in the long term, most people gain that weight back and more because their body is trying to protect themselves from any kind of like removal of energy or calories in the future. So this is just pervasive. I think it's all over, even in our medical world. I think, there's still a pretty big idea that there are certain people who are healthy and not healthy, fully dependent on weight. And there's kind of systemic fat phobia that kind of interweaves all of those things. And so I say that not necessarily to like shame anybody who feels like, they think X amount of weight is unhealthy or is going to be a detriment to performance. It's almost expected, right? Like we've been grown up in this society. So to have those messages and have those beliefs, super, super normal. I'm kind of here to shed a light on like, hey, these are the beliefs that we've had, but there's actually more data that says that focusing on that thing may not actually be very helpful at all and may not actually have those determinants, those scary consequences that maybe there were once thought of before. And I could probably talk about diet culture forever. And so if we want to have more discussions, I'm happy to follow up with anybody. Just another kind of like PSA, I feel like I've already harped on this a lot, but even though eating disorders are diagnosed with weight and food intake, they are psychological disorders, not weight disorders. And again, like I mentioned, this can be really harmful if they are viewed as weight disorders because people aren't really thinking, that if someone doesn't look a certain way, but someone could really be stressed out or someone could really be struggling. And even if they look fine, that's really not a good indicator. And telling someone they look fine when they are asking for help or that they're struggling is super detrimental. I think it really plays into the stigma of mental health and getting support when needed. So some risk factors I want to go over. I mentioned there's kind of like general risk factors. So the biological, psychological, and social model. This is kind of for all people. Biological is like having any relative in the family, any kind of family history of a mental health disorder, especially an eating disorder. If it's in the family, someone's at risk. Having a negative energy balance. So what that means is having less input and more output. So they're not really getting enough nutrients to keep up with the output that they're doing. A history of dieting, those all kind of fall under the biological. Psychological factors would include perfectionism. We will get much more into that later because our athletes are usually quite perfectionistic and high achieving. Body image dissatisfaction. So if someone is really unsatisfied with their body, and they may again have learned that through diet culture, in rigidity, wanting to make sure everything is kind of perfectly in order and doesn't have a lot of flexibility if they're not. The social components, again, I think we've talked about this, but weight stigma, the internalizing of the societal ideals, culture, whether it's family culture, team culture, et cetera, and bullying. Bullying is a huge one. Some risk factors specific to our athletes. So there's sport type, which we see the number one sport type is aesthetic sports. So we're thinking dancers, figure skaters, gymnasts, plus, usually the revealing uniform. All of those sports likely have those. The second number at risk sport is endurance sports. And again, if we want to sprinkle on the revealing uniform as another risk, we're thinking swimming, running, things like that. So high endurance sports, with or without the revealing uniform, and even higher risk if they have that revealing uniform. Early start in sport. So the earlier someone starts in sport, the higher the risk. Overtraining, weight cycling. So weight cycling is the process of losing weight and gaining weight over and over and over. We can particularly see this in a sport like wrestling. Team dynamics and coach-athlete relationships, kind of speaking to that social culture part. Injuries. So if someone is injured, we see a couple different things, whether someone is injured and that pulls them away from sports. So suddenly the mindset changes into, hey, like I'm not working out as much anymore. So like I really don't need to be eating as much, and having that be a slippery slope into an eating disorder. Or some people who are coming back from injuries and they're saying like, hey, my body isn't functioning the way it used to function. I'm feeling really upset. Things feel really out of control. Let me see if I can turn to food and exercise as a way to gain some control. In terms of also injury, I threw like a COVID-19 picture in there because we did see a lot of athletes too who COVID nationally or like throughout the world really impacted our athletes because again, it pulled them away from their sport and that challenged their amount of exercise and ability to engage in their sport that they like, as well as just kind of feeling disconnected from their sport and from their team and overall their identity. So that we did see a lot of athletes come in saying like, yeah, my eating disorder started right around COVID. So just something important to note too. And then the last one there specific to athletes is performance level. So the higher performing an athlete, the higher competitive level, the more at risk someone is. Likely that's due to like the higher pressures, higher expectations, and being up against the best of the best and trying to do any little thing you can to win or to reach that next level. And sometimes the brain says, that's food or that's my body image. So to share all of that, up to 45% of athletes suffer from disordered eating or eating disorders. So that's almost half. So just to kind of be aware, and again, like I mentioned, disordered eating, it doesn't necessarily have to be like a full-blown eating disorder, but people are struggling in one way or another with these signs and symptoms that I've mentioned. So I mentioned that because it's really important and it's really important for a lot of reasons. And one of that is like the potential consequences that can come from disordered eating and eating disorders. I'll share. Yep.
I had a quick question pop in about what constitutes an athlete.
Ooh, that's a good question. I would say, in my personal opinion, is like someone who is engaged in some kind of sport, or even I would say like performing arts as well, who is competitive and dedicates time and energy into like perfecting their craft. And that, I think that depends too on like how much they're using their body. But at the Victory program, we talk about serving like athletes and performers. And so I think anyone who is engaged in that, or if they were engaged in that, I had worked with a lot of athletes who are retired from sport, but they spent the better of like 10 plus years in sport. And they're like, I don't feel like an athlete anymore. And I'm like, I think that's up to you. Like you get to decide if you like want to hold on to that identity or not, or like how you maybe want to engage in sport or movement post kind of like competitive era. But I have a more like wide view on who is an athlete in my mind. And I do think that typically encompasses like a more inclusive model than kind of saying like the pro athlete or like the collegiate athlete. Like they're good and well as well. But, even like this summer league swimmer, or the fall like football cheerleader, like I think all of those people qualify. The ping ponger, the dancer, the juggler, like I think all of those people would constitute as athletes in my mind, and maybe not so much in others. So to talk a little bit about the medical consequences, I won't go too far into this because this is a little less my wheelhouse as a psychologist and more our psychiatry and medical professionals. But basically, this is the relative energy deficiency model. And we see that the negative energy imbalance, again, you're getting more output and less input, can lead to low heart rate. This is huge in our athletic community because we think, and there's kind of this notion that like the athlete heart is a little bit lower anyway. And that is true, but really anything under 50 beats per minute is considered like a troublesome low heart rate. Some people might naturally be below 50, and if they're an athlete, but we typically see athletes who are under 50 in the 40s and even the 30s who feel proud, and that it kind of feels like an accomplishment to be in that low heart rate because that means they're super athletic. But really, that's a sign of low energy imbalance, and that's actually quite dangerous. Low bone density. So again, like we see young folks with osteopenia and osteoporosis because of the negative energy imbalance, suppressed endocrine functioning, gastrointestinal issues, impaired sleep and fatigue, depression, and other mental health challenges. I would also say like menstrual function for women, that whether a youth athlete is like supposed to probably have gotten their period at a certain point and they haven't, or if they have and then they've lost it, that's another really huge sign to be curious if there's that negative energy imbalance. Performance consequences. So of course, if any of those medical consequences are going on, you're going to have performance consequences. But when we look specifically into performance consequences, we see some of these. So decreased muscle strength, increased risk of injury. Again, if like you're at risk of osteoporosis or osteopenia and you're not fueling appropriately, your risk of injury goes way up. Decreased concentration and coordination. I put a little asterisk there because we're talking about our youth athletes. They're also in school. They're also trying to learn. So not only are they not going to be able to concentrate in their sport, they're going to have a really hard time in school, and that's going to feel like a double whammy. Decreased endurance, decreased training response. So how frustrating is it to go into practice and be working on a skill and working on a skill and working on a skill, and then feeling like no matter what you do over the next several weeks, that skill is just not sticking? Incredibly frustrating. So, you know, that could also be another thing, like kind of like a domino effect of like, you know, the disordered eating, decreasing training response. And now I'm getting more kind of mental health challenges because this is like really, really wearing me down on my mental, emotional resilience. Impaired judgment. So a lot, I think especially like hand-eye coordination type sports, that'll really suffer. A quick note in the blue there, some athletes will perform well despite having an eating disorder, but in the long term, it will negatively impact the athlete, both physically and mentally. So I say this because we typically see some athletes come in and we talk about like a bell curve where they're like, what do you mean? Like I started restricting and I ran faster than I ever have in my life. I PR'd. And you're telling me I should stop doing this and that you want me to eat more? Like, no way. And I'm like, fair. That sounds like why would you want to change if like it's working out for you so well? So again, it typically is a bell curve. And if they're at the top of their peak performance in their eating disorder, it will fall down on the other side. It's just kind of a matter of when. So I think providing that information is really helpful. It's certainly not easy to digest. I feel like youth athletes especially are like, yeah, but that's a future me problem. But I think kind of like reminding of like, hey, like longevity in sport can be huge. Like, let's just try to, you know, quell some of these disordered eating habits so that we don't drop over the bell curve like that. Mood consequences. So, I mean, especially if we're thinking about restrictive models, if anyone has like missed a meal in this audience or even missed a snack or dinner was running late, you kind of got hangry. Yeah, that's just like a morsel of like what kind of comes up with mood consequences. So there's a lot of, you know, comorbid disorders like anxiety and depression. We also often see our athletes or people with eating disorders start to isolate from friends, families, loved ones. I think a huge one too is either you can have really large mood swings, so being really irritable, lashing out, having mental breakdowns, big cries, things like that. And we can also see the kind of mellowing out or like numbness. So like there's almost no feelings going on. And again, none of these things are going to help that athlete in their well-rounded life and especially in their sport.
Savannah, we just had someone ask if you could address how to have a conversation about these long-term consequences with well-performing athletes who are struggling with either eating disorders or disordered eating.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Like I said, I feel like it's a difficult conversation. I try to get them as involved as possible, especially if they are really at that like peak performing level, but like, you know, maybe they've lost their period, and maybe they're too tired to do anything after practice. Like they go to practice, they come home, and they basically go to sleep. They don't have enough energy for anything else. Um, I think that's one mode that I do is I say, cool, that's great. Like your sports performance is better than ever. What about the rest of your life? How are your friends doing? Are you still hanging out with your friends? Sometimes yes, sometimes they're like, no, because all they want to do is go out and eat or go to Starbucks. And I can't do that because I can't have that food. Um, or talking about like, what other kinds of things are they missing out on, or things in their life that aren't going well. And I kind of turn a spotlight there to say, like, hey, we're not being super well rounded, even though sport is awesome right now. I also try to maybe like draw that bell curve out and just kind of give them that visual. Um, and not to like scare them, but I do kind of share some of those medical challenges as well of being like, hey, like things are really great right now, but like if we get osteoporosis in the next year, like that's going to be a bigger detriment to your athletic career than doing some renourishment right now. And then just like validating the heck out of that. It feels really good to be performing the best in sport, and to ask someone to give that up feels really crummy. So those are kind of like my initial thoughts on that, but it is a tough and kind of ongoing conversation. Like I don't think I just have it once with athletes. We continually process it out. So moving on to awareness and identification, some of this will look familiar because I think we've kind of talked about it through the consequences. But if you're seeing any changes in attitudes or behaviors related to food, weight, and self perception. So, with eating, seeing someone eat less, someone eating slower, someone eating alone, I think that's huge. Again, like, am I pulling away from social things that I typically would engage with because I feel like I can't have that food anymore? New or extreme interested in fad diets or clean eating, I also would be like very mindful of our youth athletes and what they're looking at on social media. I feel like there's fit talk, there's gut talk, like all these different kinds of like for you pages on TikTok that really emphasize like clean eating or losing weight, um, or like find out what foods you're allergic to. Like even that can be hard for our athletes because they're like, hey, I want my gut to be optimally performing for me. And they get these allergy kits that basically just tell them to like cut out carbs or something like that that they might really need to sustain that level of high performance. Um, Body image. So people who are really, really like emphasizing a lot of their emotional energy into their weight and into their size. And really, we see a lot of self worth tied to that too. And not just like overall self worth, but also like their ability to perform. So thinking like, if I've gained 5 pounds, there's no way I'm going to be able to train or perform as well as I did. But that's certainly not true. But the fact that like the mental place goes there can already be a huge hindrance. And it almost is like a self-fulfilling prophecy. So if they think they're going to perform poorly because they've gained 5 pounds, they've already put themselves in the negative mental state that they might actually not perform very well. And we see like mood being really tied to weight. So you have a bad body image day, someone's going to feel really sad. Or if someone's feeling really sad, they might blame it on their body. Um, Another note in there is youth athletes are expected to be growing in height and weight up until their adolescence and in their late 20s. So if someone's body is not changing through their adolescence, some folks think like, oh, I should stay the same weight as I was when I was a freshman in high school. That's not true. So being aware of that and kind of just being curious with your athletes is a big help. Over exercising, we'll talk a little bit more on this later. Personality, again, like those mood swings, lack of emotion. I also think that sometimes I see athletes talk about something they're really excited about, that they're like, hey, like I found this new like weight training program that's going to help me. I can move in a new way. And I think it's going to help my sport performance. And they're like super, super excited. And I'm like, this is all good and well. And like, let's slow down for a second. Like, what is this going to help you with? Are you sure that this is for your sport performance, or is like the eating disorder kind of coming out, finding another way to move? So just kind of being, again, curious is kind of like my key, when I move through kind of being trying to understand these athletes better and what they may or may not be struggling with.
Savannah, someone just typed in to ask if athletes are still under their parents' supervision in high school or middle school. Do you recommend educating parents and coaches on things they should pay attention to in order to make sure the athletes are healthy? And how would you go about doing that?
100%. Yes. I talk a little bit later about kind of soliciting support and getting a team together, whether that's like a professional team or, just like teachers, school counselor, coaches, parents, kind of all being on the same page. I certainly feel like at McCallum, we see people who are coming in almost every day on an outpatient basis. Like I see someone once a week, but they go home and they live at home for the majority of the time and they're under that influence. And so having parents being aware of, what getting adequate nutrition looks like and just being able to, because it's also like really easy. Athletes often accidentally under fuel. And so for parents to and the athlete to be aware of like, okay, what do I actually need to do? And this might feel like I'm eating too much, but this is actually what I need to do if I'm like having, you know, 3-hour workouts every day of the week and sometimes doubles. So I certainly think that like connecting in with your resources, whether you're starting at a school counselor and moving that route. I have some resources later, but definitely I think trying to get everyone as educated as possible is definitely helpful. So another kind of thing to look out for is this gray area between the good athlete and someone with an eating disorder. Because we see good athletes, strong athletes, they care a lot about their sport, they're mentally tough, they pursue excellence, they're okay with pain, they push through the pain. And there's this kind of gray line that when they push a little too far on all of those really amazing qualities, they might actually be entering a zone that's not helpful anymore. So the difference of perfectionism versus pursuit of excellence. Can someone maintain their love of sport and their love of challenge and their hopes and their dreams and chase that rather than saying, I must be perfect or else? That's a different tone. That's more of I need to perform based out of fear and because of these rigid rules I have for myself. That's different than performing and training for the love of sport and the love of like wanting to do good and to compete and all of those things. So this is a really challenging gray area. And I think I try to ask athletes a little bit more of like, why? What, like when you were doing that race, like something was really starting to hurt in your leg. Like, why did you keep going? And they're like, oh, well, I mean, it was just like a really like, I could tell my legs could make it. Versus other athletes, they were like, I knew that I had torn something, but I didn't care. So they're kind of ignoring some of those challenges. I have a case example later that might highlight a little bit of like ways to go about being curious about this gray area and where maybe someone is moving from the good athlete to a more disordered place. Another note is that sport culture, while amazing as it is, can also be toxic because sport culture tells athletes to, never be satisfied, to push through the pain, to always be better, and to never show weaknesses. And I think, again, that helps, especially in the training mentality, like when a workout's really hard and you're just trying to get through it. But when someone again takes that too far, they're prioritizing the game over their personal life and they're accepting risks and playing through pain and injury and accepting no limits. Like they're like, I will do whatever it takes to be the best. And really, like when we think about that, it's like, okay, and then at what cost? Are you gonna, tear your Achilles? Are you gonna pass out? Are you gonna vomit? Are you going to be in an eating disorder? Like, things can get really scary really fast. So again, as parents and as coaches who are potentially listening, like finding ways to give encouragers, and I have some ideas for you all later, to give some encouragers that kind of help with that morale and pushing through really hard challenges, and always trying to level up. I think that's fair as athletes. Like, you get a PR, you want another PR, and how to balance that with, I'm not going to risk it all, like it literally all, to be the best. This is a fun little graphic on like the difference between balanced and unbalanced exercise. I think, again, like I kind of highlighted, that well balanced is like fun and intentional. You're working to get more strength, you're enjoying the competition, and you're also honoring your body's cues of like, when is it like a feel good burn or that good hard work feeling in your body, that kind of pain, versus a sharp pain or a pain that might be injuring you. Are you flexible or are you rigid? And we see this a lot also with like athletes who are like, I don't care that it's sleeting outside, I'm going to go for my run. It's like, man, can we do like some cross training today in the gym where it's safe? Or if someone's sick, they say, no, I cannot miss my workout. That might be a sign that someone's having an unbalanced relationship with exercise. This is a great graphic. I love talking about this. And for the sake of time, I'm going to keep moving. Here are some prevention strategies. So being mindful of verbally and nonverbal communication. So I think, again, like we're no one's immune to the diet culture. So we might be talking about our own weight, or we might find ourselves talking about someone else's weight, and just trying to be mindful of that, because your youth athletes, those ears are listening to you and they're picking that up, whether you're talking directly to them or not. Being aware that weight really isn't the biggest factor for sports performance. There's actually at least 40. And focusing on weight can be the one that actually causes all these negative consequences than being the one that actually helps. So there's this 40 factors of sport performance. So we see that there's so many other things that someone could focus on to, work towards peak performance, and wouldn't be as harmful as focusing on weight. I mean, even just thinking about like training or sleep or rest, or mental toughness. There's a plethora of good sports psychology out there to focus on the mental game. That why would we focus on weight when we know the risks? And then being curious, especially being curious about the whole athlete. That athlete, especially as they get more entrenched in their sport. I was a swimmer, so I was someone who was training every day of the week, sometimes double, and I was spending all of my time with my swimmer friends. And so it can be really easy to just think of, oh, Savannah the swimmer. And it's like, sure, sometimes, but I'm a lot more than that. So how can you be curious about the whole athlete and bring that out in the athlete themselves? So here are some curious questions. And you may notice that they, except for that second one, they really don't talk about weight or shape. It's more of like, how are you overall? How's school going? Freshman year, that's so hard. How are you doing from that transition from middle school? How are things at home? Are you having fun in sport? And if you want to say, like, I've noticed some changes, because sometimes you do notice those changes, you don't have to ignore that or like play like you don't see those changes. Just being like, hey, I've noticed some changes in you. Like, how's it going? How are you doing? Is everything okay? And see what comes up, and just kind of explore the empathy and validation you can give them first, and then follow up with questions and see if there's some kind of support you can help and offer them. Creating culture. So our coaches and our parents here, and our teachers, whoever is there to support athletes, is you can create an amazing culture in your team. I honestly think that a good coach or an awesome team is like going to be so important for an athlete's overall happiness and performance. And so just kind of seeing like, all right, can we, instead of being the best at all costs, can we say like, let's keep going. Let's keep trying. I don't expect it to be perfect. Like, let's work hard and have fun. Instead of kind of being that rigid, I think of like just the kind of like sport culture coach screaming, like, get it together. What are you doing? Can we find ways to encourage our athletes and get them through hard times? But it's also, being very mindful of, not saying things that are super negative. A couple other things to talk about with creating culture is emphasize personal success and how that like generalizes to a strong life, or even if like they're doing really well in school, how that can help with athletics. Have a lot of enthusiasm and motivation for someone who is like doing well in sport or trying. And trying to leave like the weight and the shape stuff to the side and not really enforcing those things, instead enforcing the other things that make an athlete great. So here are just some examples of giving positive reinforcement, and then also adding in some areas of growth. So like saying, nice try, let's get closer. It was a tough meet this weekend. How are you going to take care of yourself? How can I support you? Like, you're a strong athlete. Not every game's going to be perfect. Stay true to who you are. So you can acknowledge if an athlete's struggling, like that's totally fine. Athletes will struggle sometimes, but we don't need to make it this like end all be all scary thing. You can say like, hey, we're gonna game plan together. We're gonna get back to training and we're gonna figure out what changes we need to make to get you to the place where you need to be. So that way that athlete doesn't kind of go home disappointed in themselves and thinking, I suck. Like, what do I need to do to get better? And then potentially turn to food. A huge one here is diversifying activity, interest, and exposure. This goes with that athletic identity piece where, we want our athletes to be well-rounded. I was someone who I committed to swimming at a very early age, and I feel like a lot of our like competitive athletes commit to sports like when they're really young. And I always wanted to play volleyball. And I never did. I think I was in the 6th grade and I was like, I cannot play volleyball. I cannot take time off of swimming. And I think back now and I was like, I was 12. Like, would it have really hurt my swimming career had I taken one season to try volleyball? I don't think so. And I honestly think it probably would have helped, give myself some diversity in my experiences and also be able to then, if I chose swimming after volleyball, like it would reinforce my love for the sport rather than feeling like I had to be there or like I couldn't miss a practice. Also thinking about like performing arts or hobbies or time off, like it's okay to have a time off. I've heard of families who were like, hey, we're going to cancel our annual vacation so that she can go to this meet or she can go to this game. And it's like, no, don't do that. I fully understand why. Like, the kids can also be so passionate about their sport. The coaches want that athlete there. The parents want to do their very best to support that athlete. So it can feel like the game is everything. Let's sacrifice for the game. It makes total sense to me. And it really, really isn't that deep all the time, right? If it's like the championship game, probably, something to consider. But like if it's one game out of a million, take that family vacation. Or even like every kind of, if there's a game every weekend or a meet every weekend, you don't really have to do every single one, but figuring it out with coach and with parents and figuring out which is going to be the best time for the athlete to actually like get up and try a performance and try to compete and see what comes of it. I think trying to just find that individualized plan instead of feeling like every opportunity to perform is a must. I put the emphasizing this importance of rest days. Let your athletes take PTO. When we're, us folks who have jobs, it's like when we go on a vacation, like our bosses, hopefully, or, we're not supposed to really be checking our emails, or we're not really supposed to be thinking too much about work. We're supposed to be resting so that we can go back to work and do a good job. But if we're continuing work throughout our vacation, we're probably going to feel super burnt out and not do our job as effectively. Same thing for our athletes. I've also had families on vacation that are like, we're going to go on vacation, but don't worry, we're going to find the ice rink. She's going to get in there, and she's definitely going to, get her workouts in. Let the athlete take PTO. It's okay. They're going to come back more refreshed and ready to get into training. Check out Health at Every Size. It's a wonderful resource, and also any like sport dietitian who's informed with Health at Every Size. Again, I'm going to go a little bit quickly through this. I know we're kind of coming up close on time. Here is a quick case example that I hope kind of pushes a lot of these themes and information that I had together. But Tara's a 13-year-old competitive swimmer. Tara's always been a top performer, but her times have recently plateaued. To combat the plateau, she's become more interested in eating clean, doing extra running workouts, and stays after practice to drill extra technique work. She often in her spare time is scrolling through Fit Talk for more fitness ideas. From the outside looking in, Tara appears to be a dedicated athlete who does whatever she can do to find success personally and for her team. However, one day her coach notices Tara running on her day off and checks in with her the following day. Coach says, "Hey, Tara, how's it going? How's life been treating you?" "Hey, coach, things have been going well." "That's good. I wanted to check in and see how you've been feeling in practice and at meets." Tara says, "Practices have been great. I'm really buckling down and working harder than ever. I think it'll really help me for the championship meet." Coach says, "Yeah, speaking of training, I saw you on a run last Sunday. Usually Sundays are the day to rest and regroup before next week. What made you decide to go on that run?" So really good question right there, right? Instead of making an assumption and saying, "Hey, nice job. I saw you running. You must be really dedicated." Instead of jumping to that assumption and that compliment, he's asking the question of like, what made you decide to go on the run? And instead of also coming from a punitive lens of being like, "Hey, don't run on the weekends. That's really bad." Just kind of asking an open-ended question of like, what led to that decision? Can you tell me more? And Tara says, "I'm just really wanting to make sure I'm doing everything I can to be the best. I work hard, I'm super healthy, and if I don't reach my goals this season, I'll be devastated." Coach says, "That all makes sense to me, Tara. I know the past couple seasons have left you disappointed." Lots of validation, but it's actually really normal for your age for times to plateau. Again, more validation and more kind of normalizing her situation. So instead of overworking yourself, let's focus less on your times and more on your love for swimming and how to have fun with it again. Diversifying experience and diversifying goals. Why don't we check in next week and make a plan? Would that be okay? So kind of like giving some space, working together through something, and kind of having her have the autonomy and the power to say yes or no, or what she wants to do. So depending on what coach learns during the next meet with Tara, he can decide kind of where he wants to go. That could be roping in parents and saying, "Hey, there's not a lot to be concerned of, but this is something maybe we should keep an eye on together." Consulting with a trusted sport professional, referring Tara to a higher level of care, whatever it maybe is. But kind of that was like the example of initially just throwing out some curiosity, and then also saying like, "Hey, we got this. We're in this together. We don't have to have all the answers, but let's just figure it out together." And in terms of figuring it out together, some resources to think of. McCallum's certainly a resource. You do not have to admit to our care even if you call us. Someone can call and have an assessment done just to understand what kind of level of support they need if they are struggling with an eating disorder. You don't get charged or anything until you admit. So always feel free to call us, or even just like call me or email me personally, and I'm happy to talk a little bit. And off like all the beautiful resources that were shared at the beginning of this presentation. Lovely, lovely educational tools. NEDA is another really great educational tool. There's so much information there. The National Alliance for Eating Disorder has some free support online resources for you. I think, and then in the blue, involving parents and talking to professionals. I think if you can, rope in people. Like, it's always better to have more heads together, kind of being curious and making plans and figuring out how they can best support the athlete. In terms of like more individualized support, psychologytoday.com is a great way to search for providers in your area who also take your insurance if you just kind of want to get some individual therapy going for your athlete. School counselors are a great resource. Yeah, I think those were the main ones I wanted to hit for you all. I'm noticing the time and I'm trying to go a little bit quicker. But that is it for my presentation. Here's my contact info. Again, feel free to reach out. I know I had to speed through some areas there. So thanks for bearing with me. And if we have some time for Q&A, I'm happy to do that.
Awesome. Savannah, thank you so much. That was an incredible presentation.
Thank
We do
you.
have a bunch of questions in the queue, and just for anyone who had already asked, we are recording this. We're going to be sending out the recording afterwards, along with the slides that'll be following up in a couple of days as well. And just before we get into the full Q&A as well, since a few people asked, if you are here hoping to get CE credits, we will be sending out an evaluation following this live presentation. After you fill out the evaluation, we'll be sending that on to be processed, and you will get some follow-up within 5 business days. Okay, now to the actual questions. So Michael is wondering, do you have any thoughts on the differences with teen male eating disorder athletes? And if so, how do they differ? What are the implications for intervention there? And then follow up, do you see any importance in considering the gender match of a therapist and client?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a great question. In our higher level of care, I think we tend to see less male athletes. We have a couple right now, but I think that has a lot more to do with stigma than it does to do with prevalence. I think the prevalence for eating disorders is slightly less in males, but really not by much. So I think looking out for men who are, what ideals they're prescribing themselves to, and that might be ideals in sport or ideals in general. We typically see males who really want that more muscular look. Also certain potential sports like cross country, wrestling, football, those are sports that also can kind of emphasize weight in different ways. On the medical side, I mentioned for women, to see if people are in a negative energy balance, you're looking at estrogen levels and if they have menstruated or not. For men, it's measuring testosterone levels. So if someone is kind of curious to see if someone, may or may not be engaged in disordered eating, or if that's affecting their medical health, going to a primary care physician and getting like a full lab workup, looking at growth charts, things like that can be really helpful. But I definitely think eating disorders is stigmatized more in the male population. So just kind of, again, opening that door to say like, hey, this is for everyone. I think eating disorders, again, kind of stereotypically get like the white woman's disease, but really affects everybody. It has the potential to affect everybody. So just sharing that out loud with people and saying like, yeah, it's okay if you struggle with this. And I think gender matching for me, I think it just depends a lot more on that athlete's comfortability. Like if they might connect more with a male therapist, go for it. I think if like the easiest or most accessible resource for you is like a female therapist, have them try it out. And if they feel like, oh yeah, I could connect with them, great, pursue that route. But if feeling like having the male therapist is a must, kind of maybe exploring other options. I don't necessarily think it's a must. I think it just really depends on the connection that patient can form with the therapist.
Thanks, Savannah. Related to that topic, how can you keep an eye on athletes whose birth control affects the presence of their menstrual cycle?
Yes, that's a good question. I know in our level of care, which again, so McCallum is residential, so they're there 24/7, partial hospitalization where they're with us for 10 hours a day, and intensive outpatient when they're in for like a couple hours for a couple days of the week. When they're in our level of care, we often ask people if they're okay with pausing their birth control, just to get a better idea. We've seen some practitioners, again, who just maybe don't have the full like education and awareness around eating disorders of like, hey, you're not having your menstrual cycle, let's get you on birth control. And through having like the placebo week, they get menses. That's actually not a true indicator of getting menses. We want to see if they can get it naturally. So, that might be something to explore with your primary care physician or dietitian, of like, if someone's on birth control but you're having some skepticism, if they're okay with pausing it. There's other probably health factors or individual needs that they may or may not be able to do that. And if you can't determine things through menses, or if you can't stop the birth control, like, let's look at other things. Let's look at labs. Let's look at growth charts. Let's look at mental well-being, cognitive functioning, those kinds of things too. So it's not the end all be all indicator. I certainly think you can get creative with trying to see if someone can be regular with their cycle. But you don't need to necessarily touch birth control if that feels like too much at the time. You can look at other factors.
We have another question asking how to approach an athlete who has gained weight and it is affecting their general fitness and performance of their sport.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm always just kind of curious as like what's going on in their life. And again, just checking in on like how they're doing. I don't know if this athlete is kind of more introverted or outspoken about their struggles, or if they're coming to you being like, I hate myself, I hate my weight, I'm doing terrible. But either way, I do think just kind of being like, okay, like what's going on? Or like, tell me more about like your relationship with food. If they're like, I have gained 20 pounds, being like, tell me about how that happened, or like what's been going on. I think because even this, and sometimes like that just might be the place where that athlete's body is going and where it naturally feels the best, even though it might be impacting their athleticism. Um, I'm I'm very hesitant to ever like approach an athlete and say, hey, like I really think losing some weight would be helpful to get you back on track. I think again, it's like, let's focus on what else is going on in life. Maybe there's some stressor going on at home and they're suffering through binge eating to kind of provide some like emotional comfort. Okay, can we get into therapy and kind of talk about the stuff that's going on at home? And again, maybe the food part will resolve itself a little bit more naturally. Um, so I would definitely be curious and see what resources you can help for like the holistic, well-rounded athlete and what's going on with them as a person and in life, um, and kind of leave food as a secondary place to explore, and especially so, not trying to shame or blame their weight and trying to use that as like the primary fix it tool, if that makes sense.
Thanks, Savannah. All right, we're coming up on time, so this next one will be our last question, and it is from Kate, who noticed in her experience, many athletes don't consider themselves athletes if they're not part of a competitive team, aren't hitting a certain standard in their sport, and that this impacts who seeks care. She would like your thoughts on how to emphasize that access to sports dietitians, therapists should not just be for those who are top-level athletes, and are we missing a lot of the population who's struggling because of the stereotype that people with eating disorders are perfectionists, highly successful, etc.?
Mm-hmm. Yes, Kate. Yes, I like am so connected with you on that question. I think it's so hard, and I think I do a lot of it even with athletes who come into McCallum when they're like, well, I retired 3 years ago, but I'm still struggling with letting go of my athletic identity, or I want to get into sport in a different way, but I just don't really feel like I should be here. I don't think I should be doing athlete eating disorder stuff. And I'm like, do you think this is helpful for you? Do you think being in these groups that focuses on athletes in recovery are helpful, or do you think you need a different focus for your recovery? And a lot of the times they say it's helpful. And I'm like, then you belong here. Like, you can be an athlete for as much or as little as you want. I think some people feel they just need that permission that like you can embrace your athletic identity in whatever way that you want. It does not have to be the top level thing. And so I just kind of preach that to people in my immediate environment. And hopefully that permission to like just be themselves and to be flexible and fluid with that athletic identity is enough. But if not, I think I could probably think up some resources that maybe maybe emphasize that a little bit more. But yeah, I think modeling it and sharing it is kind of the best way, at least in my experience.
Awesome. Savannah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Kristen.
Yeah, so for everyone who joined us here today, again, thank you so much for attending. This has been incredible. I love hearing more about ways to support more folks in our communities, and we will be sending out the recording following. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to email me, kristen.portland@anna.org, or Savannah, who has shared her email already. And if you're looking to learn more about McCallum Place and the Victory Program, you can contact Kelly, kelly.kelly@mccallumplace.com. Okay, and with that, I wish all of you a wonderful day. Thanks so much for attending.